Hey guys, Graham Smith here for Voluntary Japan. I was thinking I might share my quote deconversion story, as they call it, or my deconstruction, my exit from Christianity. And I don't know if I'm going to do this in just a single fell swoop here in one video, or if I'm going to do it in a sort of a series sort of fashion. But I typically enjoy hearing people's deconversion stories on YouTube and Odysee, wherever they are. I like to listen to them because they're always really, really unique, but they always contain uh, really striking common threads to me. Because if you've been through the indoctrination, if you've been through the brainwash, if you grew up in a heavily religious environment, you understand what the struggle is like to come out of that and some of the abuse that happens within that. So I guess I'll just start by saying that, yeah, from about as far back as I can remember, I was told about Jesus, God, heaven, hell, and being, quote, saved. Um, Actually, one of my earliest memories, I must have been 4 or 5. I would say 4, maybe. Yeah, probably must have been 4 or 5. But I remember playing cars with my mom, like on the carpet in the living room, and we were talking about lying and how lying is not good. And I just remember my mom telling me if you lied, you should ask Jesus for forgiveness. And I remember taking my little toy truck or whatever it was, car, and kind of smashing it into my mom's car that she was holding. And I looked at her and said, I didn't hit you, or my car didn't hit your car. I was basically trying out a lie, because this concept of lying was like kind of new to me, like putting a name on that. That's what lying is. And basically, we talked about how when you lie, you're supposed to ask for forgiveness. So we may have even asked for forgiveness for that little innocent experiment there. But just to give you an idea of how deeply ingrained that religious thinking was in me, and that kind of foreshadowed or showed a common thread in my personality, like that before I even got to know myself, um, of testing things out and like experimenting. I remember being told, this is around the same time, to take a nap. I had to take a nap every day. And I remember intentionally leaving, not taking a nap. The door was closed, and playing with my big Duplo blocks, Lego blocks, and intentionally leaving them out so my mom would find them, just to see that like I lied or I deceived her or something. And there were other instances like this. This isn't, I don't mean to give the impression that I was a compulsive liar as a kid. I wasn't. The lying experiments came about, I think, because I was told about asking for forgiveness and how you shouldn't lie and stuff like this. And then I started to say, well, test out the waters and see what this whole lying thing was all about. I didn't naturally lie. I pretty much think I told the truth to a fault, almost too much sometimes. Um, but anyway, that was kind of the beginning. But I remember also in that same house around that same era, laying on my top bunk, kind of restlessly looking at the ceiling, kicking the covers, and thinking, okay, they told me I need to ask Jesus into my heart. That's how people get saved. They told me that's how people get saved. They weren't like forcing me to do it. But I remember thinking, well, I got to do this shit because I don't know how much I had heard about hell at that point, but I understood it was very bad if you didn't have God and Jesus and if you weren't saved. So that was that's my memory of it, and I remember praying to Jesus to come into my heart with my eyes kind of wide open, looking at the ceiling, kind of kicking the sheets above my head, like little kids do, just kind of restlessly. And I didn't feel anything. but I was just going through the motions. And even at age like 4 or 5 or whatever age that was, I remember having the feeling, the impression of the uncomfortable hint underneath of, I'm just going through some motions here. This doesn't really have any. So, anyways, that's those are some of my earliest memories, just to give you an idea that I was raised in this environment where religion was really kind of heavily pushed. And that in and of itself might not have been so bad, except it was coupled with an emotionally volatile house at times. Not all the time, but pretty much all the time there was, in me at least, this fear that things were emotionally going to go south. Stress, anxiety. When your parents are heavily religious, they're really kind of hyper concerned about raising you the right way and kind of super uptight. And my parents were married at 18. They were very young when they had me. It was just a few years after they were married. I reckon maybe maybe 6 years after, 4 to 6 years after. Don't really want to do the math right now. I could, I guess, but they were just kids basically. Like I'm 41 now, and I look back to when I was 24 or whatever, and think, wow. But I know that doesn't always determine people's maturity. But what I remember is a very tense household. I was also raised totally unlike kids are raised here in Japan, where you're put in a cradle at night, even if you're crying, you're fed and stuff. But even if you're crying for mommy or daddy, you're just left there all night, which I view as abuse now. I don't blame my parents for it. Like, it's not intentional abuse, but I do recognize that part of it was abuse, and it's what shaped me. Um, because when kids are crying, they won't just this, and a million people from my generation and their generation before, and generations before, went through this, where it's like, but I think when you go back far enough in the years, eventually you do have co-sleeping and sensible parenting. But around that time in the 80s and 70s, there started to emerge these ideas about letting kids just cry themselves to sleep and all this other bullshit, isolating them. So I have kind of traumatic, like, visceral muscle memories of not wanting to be alone in that crib and kind of crying out. But anyway, that was coupled with, sometimes my dad had an explosive temper. There was corporal punishment. I was spanked with a belt. And this was a result, as I see it, of my dad's kind of struggles and battles inside himself to be a good dad, and insecurity and struggles with religion, and his own dad abusing him. And, I know people have fucking terrible childhoods where they're getting their eyes blacked and all this other shit and molested. It's nothing like that. But it's enough emotional volatility and fear that it fucked me up. And combine that explosive anger of a dad with this story of a God that's explosively angry in the sky, and then you can kind of see, like, you start to live in a fear-based reality instead of an explorative reality or exploratory one, which kids are naturally exploratory. But when you start to get shamed for things you do, you start to get messages that come through clearly from your parents, from the church, from the Bible. Like, one of the first messages I got was that the body is shameful. A couple ways. I remember being real small and my mom just coming out of the bathroom, and she didn't know I was there, and she was naked, and she's covered up and slammed the door. And I remember feeling like ashamed, like I did something wrong, but I was just there in the house. She didn't know I was there. Maybe I was in a room or something. I don't know. I just remember that happening. I remember my had an older friend who lived just a couple houses down, and he had drawn a picture of He-Man on the driveway in chalk and drew a big giant penis on He-Man, and with pee coming out. And I remember my dad seeing it as we were leaving to go out to eat or something that night, and I felt ashamed because he was really pissed off about that. And me, like, if one of my son's friends had done that, I would have, like, laughed. I might have sprayed it off the driveway, but it's just the attitude and the uptightness and the the body shame, this whole thing about, and the Bible is replete with that, crucify the flesh, mortify the evil deeds of the body, and all this stuff. Your natural drives and impulses that supposedly God also gave you, God wants you to absolutely be ashamed of them instead of learning to live with them and master them and regulate them and enjoy them and ride the waves of them. Is completely unhealthy. So that toxic shame started to get ingrained into me. Um, and the message that you've always got to be on guard not to sin, and what is a sin and what isn't a sin, combined with the corporal punishment, which is absolutely terrifying. And I would go as far back, and people might take issue with me on this, but I don't care. It's fucking child abuse. Is being circumcised will be the beginning of this whole thing, which is infant genital mutilation. I don't care what you say. That's exactly what it is. And regardless of the excuses people give, the reason it's practiced in the West is because of Judaism, because of Christianity, something that's not even fucking my culture. So I was in the thick of it from the beginning. And, just seeing this kind of lack of humor, the kind of constant fear, and being told that this world and this life are really nothing. You should focus on something after this that no one's quite sure about, but we can read about it in the Bible and this, that, and the other. And I did take comfort in a lot of that stuff. And if you're in Christian communities, as if you grew up in them, you'll know that the comforting stories about unexplained things that happened to people where someone was healed or so and so saw an angel and so and so's life was saved and all these things. And you do see crap in the world, so you think there's definitely got to be something better than this, and they're telling me there is, and that, so they must be right, they know there's something better. So that was the beginning of it for me. Immense shame and guilt around the body and isolation as an infant and toddler. I would say my dad, and I don't know if he'll watch this, I don't want anyone to feel hurt by this, but I would say he was, due to his struggles with himself, often quite emotionally absent. And that my mom, due to not wanting to face uncomfortable realities, would just kind of pretend things were okay. They had their battles, holes punched in stereo speakers and shouting matches and shit. And I must have been aware of it, even if just viscerally, as an infant. And went through some of the same struggles when my child was small, and still doing my best. But that stuff affects little kids, shouting, punching the walls, doing this shit, even if it's not like we've never had physical abuse, but any sort of emotional tension is very, very tough for a child to go through, especially when their family, they have no outside perspective of how some people have arguments sometimes and this, that, and the other, or how tough things can be. They just see their caretakers, who they rely on for absolutely everything, are now in this tensile, chaotic situation, and their very existence is threatened, and the feeling of receiving love is threatened. So anyways, yeah, that was the beginning, and I internalized that shit and began to feel guilty. But then in elementary school, it was like I still that kind of untouchableness, that part of me that never quite took the stain, if you will. Like if you've ever stained wood, some parts of the wood just won't absorb it. There was part of me that just wouldn't absorb that, and I'm really glad for that. I continued experimenting. I remember the first time I said the F word, which was so scandalous to me in my own little world. I remember I fell off this geodesic jungle gym kind of structure and hit my elbow, and I remember just thinking in my head, okay, I'm gonna say it, and I just went, fuck. And then I remember debating kind of if I needed to tell my mom. I might have told her. But I started to develop kind of symptoms of like OCD